I think for Reddit, like I prefer the more distributed, like where possible, distributed decision making is better. Just because
Mhm.
like, why the hell did you hire all these experts if you're not going to get their opinion on something?
You started programming when you were younger because you like computer games, and later on you've studied like physics in grad school. And like, tell us more about like how you started your career in programming. And later on, I know that you joined YC because, and then that's how you met the Reddit founder because they were renting an apartment with you. So yeah, I would love to learn more about like how you started your career.
Cool. So let me give the I guess give the abridged version of my life story. So I started using computers. So let me get quick vintage on me. So I'm a 90s kid.
Mhm.
I'm late Gen X, which makes me a little old for most of the tech startups around these days, or at least the ones that haven't already IPO'd or done something else along the way. I got my first computer I didn't get until I was about 14, and so I was in high school at that point. And I remember almost immediately, this is before computers were by default networked, so it was like just sitting happily with my 486, like playing around with it. And I think that I discovered QBasic just by like trying every possible command on the DOS prompt to see what I got, and then found this entire programming environment and just like started playing with it. And so that was my first experience, was like just kind of the figure it out method of computer programming.
Mhm.
In the meantime, at the time, like there was a lot of work that went into curating your computer so you could actually run computer games. Memory management was a critical thing, and so just kind of learning all that stuff early on was definitely formative. I mean, in retrospect, at the time, it just seemed like normal tinkering that you do as a kid. And then later, when I actually got into college, I remember I had to decide between, I was trying to decide between doing math, physics, and computer science. And so I ended up taking the intro to all three classes my freshman year. At that point in my career, I was definitely much more of an overachiever. That took years and years to burn out on. Uh, and decided to stick with physics actually at that point. And so did a whole degree in physics, made it all the way through to my PhD, um, and decided it was about 4 years into my PhD program, where I started getting a little burnt out. And I think at that point, I didn't really know that was a thing. Because, I also didn't realize until that point that up until that point in your life, there's always like a 4 year limit on how long you do a thing. It's like, high
Mhm.
school is 4 years, college is 4 years, PhD is whenever you finish your PhD. And so 4 years in, I was like, oh, so I have like 2 to 4 more years of this. Great. So I think I got a little bit uh, uh, jumpy, like kind of jumpy, and actually got a friend pitch me on a startup that turned into me getting into the first Y Combinator batch, like totally lucky, and eventually turned me into being the first employee at Reddit when my startup failed. But my two roommates, whose names were Steve and Alexis, succeeded at keeping their company going for a lot longer. That's
Yeah.
the short version.
Yeah, what is the long version? What is something like
Well, I think the longer version is that finishing up. So for the Y Combinator, like first Y Combinator batch, it was fantastic. I don't think the nice thing about that batch is like we were all kind of doing it live. Like
Mhm.
no one, the YC founders, especially Paul and Jessica, put a lot of work into Paul Graham and Jessica Livingston, um,
Mhm.
put a lot of work into trying to make it so that it was really easy and seamless to build a startup and like take all the BS out of it, so that
Mhm.
because at that point, it's 2005. We were still dealing with the hangover from the dot-com bust in 2000.
Mhm.
And so people weren't really start finding companies, and there wasn't really like an easy mechanism to even start a company. And so
Mhm.
the fact that they managed to make it into a thing where you could just kind of like, here's some paperwork, here's an initial starting grant of like, I think at the time was $6,000 per co-founder, and just go. And that was unheard of, and it was really fantastic.
Mhm.
And it was fantastic to be able to crash and burn that summer and have no company at the end of it. You learn from your failures, and that was definitely one of them. And
Mhm.
I think subsequently to that, Reddit as a startup was just a real trip in that um, we the thing about Reddit is that the site's just always grown. Like we've just always had this kind
Mhm.
of low key growth. At the time, in the early years, it was like much more low key. It was like we were doubling every 3 months in the first year. And so that meant that you could actually see on the traffic graph the noticeable kind of uptick of traffic.
Mhm.
And so it was always this game of fighting against the scaling problems we'd have to deal with about, a month or two from now. Because,
Mhm.
a month or two from now, we're going to be at like close to double traffic, which means whatever thing is creaking on the back end has to be fixed like immediately.
Mhm.
So to go back into like the personal narrative part, from over the course of 2006, it went from working on Reddit was my nighttime activity, and by day I was a PhD grad student at Harvard.
Mhm.
And then end of the year came around, and Reddit got acquired by Condé Nast. We were all told to move to California, and my PhD, like I got my data from my PhD all in that last couple months of the year. And so it turned into my PhD was my night job of me writing my thesis, and by day I was a software engineer, working on Reddit. So yeah.
Yeah, I think that's such an awesome story. I'm curious about now when you're looking at the accomplishment from the YC badge back in time, like everybody is like a superstar. Was it really obvious that like you guys were gonna make something awesome? And like how did Paul filter out like all these geniuses are gonna be like coming to this badge? Because I feel like nowadays when you look at the YC mafia, like everybody is like really, yeah, just like everyone's like really successful, and curious like how like what are some characteristic where you guys all have and like that your peers probably don't, that like make you more successful, or was it just like a coincidence?
Oh, I don't know. I think it's I think from that initial YC batch, I don't remember the numbers of successes of that. There was definitely at least an early acquisition within that, like within maybe the first few months.
Mm-hmm.
One of the startups actually ended up merging up with Reddit. There was a blog startup by the name of Infogami that ended up merging up with Reddit right around the time I started in October.
Mm-hmm.
And so that maybe that counts as a success, I guess. But I think of those startups, about half of them probably failed in some way or another, or kind of like stuck around for a bit and like moved on. That said, there was a really awesome initial batch of people. So in that first summer batch, there was Emmett Shear and Justin Kahn, who later went on to found Justin TV, now Twitch.
Mm-hmm.
There was also Sam Altman. I was doing a startup that year. He's now the supreme all-knowing dictator of YC. And Sam's great. Sam's also on our board. And it's just a lot of, especially those early years, a lot of people who just kind of stuck with it. So I don't know. I think that there's definitely a chicken and egg problem of hey, there was a gap that Paul identified that was out there. And so you tend to at the same time draw people who have a certain amount of like entrepreneurial spirit in them,
Mm-hmm.
and who are also willing to take a crazy risk. And also, I mean, that group was very, I mean, I think I was the outlier in that I was actually in grad school. Everyone else was basically
Mm-hmm.
fresh out of college.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was very much like a high beta, like it's gonna work or it's not. And like if it doesn't work, then like, yeah, we'll just get a job somewhere else. And I think that I don't want to, of course, I want to downplay how fantastic that group was, and like how that was actually most of the value, honestly, in YC was just like being able to go to dinner once a week and hang out with people who were going through exactly the same thing you were at exactly the same time and exactly the same age group. And that's continued to be the main magic in YC, is the social network attached to it of like just shared commiseration, and also a pool of people who are entrepreneurs who are trying things out and might fail, but you can tap them for expertise. And if that doesn't work out, you can always hire them later. And like that sort of network is really valuable, honestly.
That sort of like resonate with like the current cohort learning things, like everyone's trying to actually meet people instead of just learning a particular knowledge or something. And I'm curious about like at that point, were your parents cool with you doing a PhD, and after you finish your PhD, like joining a startup that may like most likely will fail, right? Like curious how, yeah, how did that play out?
Oh, my parents were very not okay with it. They thought they weren't sure what I was doing, because I at that point I had put all of my effort into finishing my like basically grad school, and PhD was like the route.
Mhm.
And it was I was my mom was, I hope she's probably going to listen to this later. Hi, mom. My mom was very originally into me being a doctor, like the regular, like the other kind of doctor, the MD.
Mhm.
That's still a running joke. It's like whenever I joke about, like I only bring up being a doctor now,
Mhm.
either because I have to flex over something which I hate doing, or
Mhm.
as a joke. And every time I bring it up around my wife, she's like, he's not that kind of doctor.
Mhm.
And so and so at least I put so much time into academia
Mhm.
that when she heard I was like spending time doing a startup, she's like, what is this thing you're doing in your spare time? Like, why aren't you working like harder on your PhD or other things? And especially when I decided to like um, uh, stick with Reddit after grad school, was definitely very skeptical given the path at that point. Now that said, one easy thing was like making software engineer money fresh out of grad school as opposed to making postdoc money was definitely not a bad thing. But that was like
Mhm.
still felt like I was abandoning an entire career, which took a while to kind of convince. I think it actually legitimately took until probably like maybe the last year, maybe like roughly before she's like, okay, maybe that's a good idea. So
Before the CTO part, everything
my mom
else
has
was
very high standards, so it's
yeah.
like the overachiever thing wasn't in a vacuum.
Why do you pick the Reddit route versus like your stable PhD route? Because it seems like the opposite, right? Because PhD seems like really, really stable after the program. You're definitely gonna have something like more stable to do. And like I think the startup is, did you just really enjoy the problem solving thing, or like was it just like the people that you enjoy working with?
I think at the roots of it, I mean, the people were great. At the roots of it, it was very much the problems were interesting. I think that
Mhm.
the way that grad school ended up working out. So I was doing experimental physics, which meant I was spending roughly like a third of my time building computer simulations of whatever I was trying to build, and then a third of my time designing the next experiment, and a third of
Mhm.
my time like in a machine shop building whatever I was going to do next, and then the
Mhm.
remaining little sliver of time was actually like doing the science part of the of the degree.
Mhm.
And so I had a lot of time to actually just like kind of ad hoc become a software engineer, like doing this. It's like effectively a couple of years of time in my grad school experience was me just doing software engineering. I
Mhm.
didn't think of it in that way, but I was definitely doing it, and so
Mhm.
I was able to kind of like practice those muscles, and it always been like a background kind of fun activity. I
Mhm.
think with just the with Y Combinator especially, what it brought to the front was like there were all these interesting real world problems that people can bring to bear,
Mhm.
where to some extent the solution is just like some combination of determination, brute force, and hope. And that was like the same problem that you had in grad school, but like in a much more, I don't know, it felt more tractable. I think grad school, by about 4 or 5 years in, it felt like there's this giant. I actually there was a comic I remember around this time that really resonated with me. It was like someone drew a picture of like, imagine this circle is all of human knowledge.
Mhm.
Your PhD is you're gonna take a little tiny dimple on the side, burst out into like the undiscovered territory, right? On this huge pile of knowledge. It's like little extra little blip.
Mhm.
And so it's that discoveries are few and far between. Well, discoveries are happening all the time, but academia is huge. And so like your contribution is going to be relatively kind of tiny over in the grand scheme of things. Whereas I felt
Mhm.
like with software engineering, there were like real world problems and really hard problems that were being solved like live there, like now.
Mhm.
Um, and I think also the skill set of being a physicist is like around. It's like kind of you take problems apart. They train you for
Mhm.
years just to learn how to take problems apart, and that works
Mm.
just as well in software engineering as it does in any kind of science. In fact, physicists are generally pains in the ass because there's this presumption that you can like solve any problem once you figure out physics, and it's true in the non-annoying way. It's true insofar as like you're trained for all of your time to like take a really hard problem and break it into pieces and then solve the pieces and then put it all back together. And
Mhm.
that's a really great toolkit to be able to apply.
I really like that you really set like the core things that you learn at your PhD or like doing the physics things, because it is like you said, it's like kind of all internally like related to programming as well, like taking a problem, breaking into smaller problems, I guess.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. I think I
Yeah.
mean because the big problem is usually difficult. The little problems are not necessarily easy, but they're usually easier than the big problem.
Yeah.
And then and you can actually start applying tools to little problems. Like there's probably other people who have solved those problems.
Yeah.
Getting very abstract, but like that's kind of the nut of it.
I thought that's really cool that like you're very one of the really rare people who can handle like all the really academic things as well as the startup world, because most likely, when you hear about like the top startup founders or like the startup teams are made up by really like the pirates of the world, or like they, drop off college and like not finish anything. And then you're like really like a good student. You're like basically I assume you were like the straight A student. experience all your career. Now,
Guilty as charged. So, well, it's funny actually. I have a running. So there's a couple of other there's definitely a couple other PhDs at Reddit who I'm friends with, and couple PhD dropouts and various levels of people, right? And so one of the running jokes I've had for a while is that it's like when you take somebody fresh out of school and you have to figure out what level they should be at as a software engineer. You have like your like this individual contributor ladder, IC1 through, in our case, 6. And so it's like fresh out of college is like IC1, fresh out of master's is like an IC2, fresh out of a PhD, IC1, fresh out of like PhD dropout, IC3. And the reason behind that is that we spend so much time in academia, you start not being able to talk to normal people anymore, and so you have to have that kind of beaten out of you again once you've finished your degree. Whereas like the joke I have with some of the people who I know of who are fantastic software engineers who dropped out, it's like, well, first they knew what they wanted, which is just a great life skill to have, and whereas like I stuck it out for 7 years before I discovered what I wanted to have, or like accepted the fact that there was another path.
Yeah, I think like when you already invested so much time and energy into something, I definitely feel like I would be like really committed as well. And I think it's so cool that you got yourself into where you are now, and congratulations. And
Oh, thanks.
I'm curious about, like, do you think like actually doing a PhD helps your career like down the line, or do you think it was just help you with the patience or like kind of train you to break down problems?
I think it depends very much on what area you're getting a PhD in. So I think and I don't mean to pan academia as a critical as a path. I think that the problem is that there are more PhDs than there are academic posts at any given time. And so if you're going to get a PhD in something, at least make sure it's in something you can apply elsewhere or like get a job in industry, because it's a good hedge at the very least. I also think that for computer science, probably less so critical for getting a PhD right now. Like masters are usually pretty good. A lot of the cutting edge stuff is happening in industry in many cases, and so not to suggest that there hasn't been cutting edge things coming out of academic research, but usually the proof of it comes in academia, like out of academia, just because real world problems, it's moving rapidly. It's kind of hard to be tapped into what's going on in the real world when you're in academia. Now, that said, if you're talking about something like biomedicine or pick your other route, like that's definitely much more of a case to go and finish a PhD. Also, keeping in mind that I've like tech is a distinct group for startups. I think biotech is its own beast, and definitely lots of PhDs running around over there, and that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
I think the last thing I'll add is the places where I think more time in academia makes more of a difference. Data science is a place where that field didn't exist when I started. In fact, I remember the first time I heard the use of data science was around probably 2011, 2010. And I just remember thinking at the time, I was like, oh, so that's so all that stuff that we've been doing for the last couple of years has a name now. Great. I guess I'm a data scientist. That's great to know. So, because at that point it was like there wasn't really much of a discipline, and so it was great to see it form. That's a place where having a degree in statistics probably helpful. Knowing some more advanced techniques for things is definitely helpful.
Probably most of the cutting edge technology are happening in the industry itself. So I think you joined Reddit as the first employee, right? And then now you're the CTO. Curious, back in time, assuming you were coding all day, actually doing all the technical part. And now, assuming you're like majorly interacting with people, paying attention to the general pictures, and curious, like, what is one skill that you're constantly trying to get better at? It could be like technical skill, like coding, or soft skill, like sales or like communications.
I would say at this point, I only threaten to write code as a way to goad people into writing code. In fact, if anything, my main job, so a lot of the work we're doing right now at Reddit is to do a lot of like rebuild and rejuvenate and replace some of our older technology with new stuff, which is another way of saying, because not for any other reason than the newer stuff will scale. We can replace it with better technology. Just apply new things. Which means that ultimately my current job is to replace all the stuff that I wrote like 10 or 15 years ago, which is actually kind of great. It's like I'm now erasing myself from the Git blame across the entire repository over time. The skills that I've been mostly putting time into has definitely been more on the people management side, or like the, long-term strategic planning, less on the actual like day-to-day building and operations. I think I think I have I try to keep my skills sharp from the standpoint of like keep up with the current trends on what's going on with
Mhm.
technology. I also have, now 15 years of experience of like spidey sense on what's going to break, and being able to
Mhm.
like inform our architectural discussions around like what to build and what not to build and why.
Mhm.
But I also have some fantastic experts who are way better at that than I am.
Mhm.
And so I think most of my job is now in the, you know, honestly, hiring is a big part of my job at
Mhm.
this point. Getting in some awesome people who are way better at their job than I would ever be, and then helping to provide direction where we're going,
Mhm.
which is a lot harder than it sounds. Like I think there's
Mhm.
nothing scary to me than a blank piece of paper of like where
Mhm.
where are we going? Yeah.
You work at Reddit because the Reddit founders came to you to rent your apartment while you were doing the PhD. Rumor says like they were playing World of Warcraft until 3 p.m. and then you kind of like you guys code and then like everybody go to sleep, you go to work, and then like the cycle repeats and stuff like that. I don't know if it's true.
It's
Cur-
it's it's
Mhm.
fairly true. In fact, so my first job at Reddit before I was an employee was so I was on a early morning schedule, like get up at 7 in the morning, which was generally a couple hours after Steve would go to bed. Steve was at the time the only engineer working on Reddit, and it was so that meant I was also a Reddit user at that point, and it was a pretty small niche site, and so I would be one of the first people in the morning to check it. And so I was like the second or third morning in a row where I had to like wake up Steve. It was like, hey, Reddit's down, like bang on his door. He just showed me how to restart it. And so I was like, my first job was as an SRE doing like monitoring of Reddit, in fact.
Mhm.
But
Yeah.
yeah, no, it was definitely a like uh hey, early 20s and mid 20s are a magical time where you can not sleep, eat nothing but garbage, don't exercise, and you still survive and you're fine the next day. So it was like that was definitely the peak of that.
I know that like Steve went on to work for Hipmunk after Reddit was bought by Condé Nast, and you sort of followed him, and you were great at figuring out who to work with. Curious, like what kind of things did you see in the people that you work with back in time, and like who is on your personal board of advisors when it comes to making career moves?
So I think from the first one, Hipmunk was actually the first real opportunity we had to grow a company past its initial startup phase.
Mhm.
So, if you look at Reddit for honestly, the first 5 years, we never had more than 10 employees. And so we never
Wow.
really did that much in the way of hiring. We got acquired very early and the team was always
Mhm.
very small. And
Six
so
month, right? After 6 months, you guys were
it was
acquired.
it was actually it was 18 months. It was
18 months. Okay.
the company was founded in June of '05, and we got acquired in October of '06. And so it was a really
Um,
15 months, very short startup period. And from that point on, we were just a small autonomous unit inside of Condé Nast. And so we hired a very small number of people in the meantime. And it wasn't really until we started. So Hipmunk was also co-founded by Steve Hoffman, and at that point he was the CTO there, and kind of siren songed me over to come and join, which was actually it was a good choice. I felt a little. It was a tough decision to make, and in fact, this is one of those cases where honestly the number one person I talked to about this is my wife at that point. It's
mhm.
like, it's like, is it time to do another startup? Like, should I abandon this like lovely, stressful but full-time job and like go back to being a startup? This is also around the time where we were planning on having a family, and
Mhm.
so the idea of like leaving my job with a child in my future, kind of decided actually that this is like probably the last chance I'd have. And so decided to do it. And I would say that a lot of the work at Hipmunk was discovering really how to grow a company up.
Mhm.
Learning how to hire, learning how to fire, learning the importance of management was really
Mm.
that period of time, to be honest. And in fact, I say one of the people who's definitely on my long-term advisor slash friend slash mentor is our
Mhm.
VP of engineer at Hipmunk. This guy Seth Sakamoto. He's We've been now friends for geez, it's been 10 years now. And, he was my boss at one point at Hipmunk. He's not my friend and mentor, and like we bang ideas off each other all the time.
I think that's really cool. Yeah, I think I saw on your LinkedIn you said Hipmunk. At Hipmunk, you sort of like learn how to grow the team, and then like so basically like you gain all the CTO job responsibilities over that area. And then
Yeah,
like
I
yeah.
had my first management experience at Hipmunk.
Mhm.
We learned how to the one of the jokes I had was like, we learned what PMs do. Was the first,
Mhm.
'cause we never had a PM at Reddit at that point.
Mhm.
I learned what designers are for. It's like, oh great, somebody can actually take care of this whole making it look nice. That's great. That's much better than what engineers would come up with. Um, and then all the mechanics in between. I remember I remember the first time. So at the time I was the back end manager, like infrastructure and kind of data and platform. And I was sitting in a meeting with our head of design, and I just remember thinking to myself like, oh boy, if we're both in the same room, this is going to be a doozy of a meeting. And now it's like I spend all my time in like giant cross-functional meetings where like I spend all this time talking to our GC about whatever the hell's going on with privacy on Reddit, which is a historically would have been something like a younger version of me would have been terrified at the idea of like, I'm going to spend my time with like cross-functional like discussions. Like that's how can I talk to these people? They're normal humans as opposed to engineers. But like no, it's been fun. And I think like it's like anything else too. I think that the process to get from that version of me to this version of me is like a slow, gradual transition, right? Like
Mhm.
every step along the way, there's another barrier, and you can
Mhm.
either go over it or through it or avoid it or decide not it's time to stop. And I guess I apparently lack an ability to stop. So I have, the running joke I have right now is, hey, CTO at a huge company like Reddit, nowhere to go but down. So
First of all, I don't think you will ever go down, but I'm curious, like at one point you joined a company as a co-founder and then you joined as a first employee, you join another fast-growing startups. Curious, like what in your perspective, like, and then you back in, and you also mentioned Reddit was like growing really steadily, right? So why do you think Reddit grow steadily compared to the other company that you've worked for?
yeah, I think to frame it in, this is something that wasn't obvious at the time, but in retrospect is very obvious.
Mhm.
So what we didn't realize with Reddit originally was that Reddit had immediate product market fit.
Mhm.
And that phrase didn't even exist until 5 years, until 5 years after Reddit was founded. There's Reddit always filled a solution to some, it filled a need that people had. It took us
Mhm.
another 10 years to articulate what that need is. And right, the way we describe it now is that Reddit is a community platform, and we help people find community belonging.
Mhm.
And our mission is to bring community and belonging to everyone in the world, right? So, and that in retrospect seems obvious, but at the time was like, we're just trying to get people entertaining stuff and give them a chance to communicate. Um, the fact of the matter is that every user, the acquisition of Reddit users was always difficult, and onboarding of Reddit users still continues to be difficult. But once we get people, they stick, and that
Mhm.
means there's something magical in the product that makes
Mhm.
them want to stick. I think to contrast that with working on Hipmunk. Hipmunk was the anti-Reddit in a lot of ways, in that it was a travel startup that had a built-in monetization scheme up front,
Mhm.
and every user we got on Hipmunk we fought for, and every user we
Mhm.
retained. Like retaining users on a travel startup, if you see the same person twice in a year, you've succeeded. Whereas like on Reddit, we're talking about, we talk about daily active users and about retention rates that are kind of day over day.
Mhm.
And so the nice thing about the contrast between the two was one, well, after 5 years working at Reddit with a bunch of users who constantly telling you what they want, having a and also having trouble with the business model. Having a company with built-in business model was very nice, except for the fact we had to fight for every user.
Mhm.
We got a chance to like really learn about like the value of experimentation. You don't want to mess up with your funnel if if the last step in the funnel is like somebody entering their credit card number. Like it's the one place you want to make sure that
Mhm.
they are absolutely not, there's nothing broken at that point, because if you lose that user, you lose them for life. Making sure that we had like good notions of, what should the user experience be? What's our goals? Like, what's our vision? What's our mission? Like all the stuff that just kind of became part of running a company. We really kind of discovered as we were doing Hipmunk. And then, bringing that back to Reddit was actually the fun part. Like, I think the lovely thing about coming back to Reddit in 2016 was there was a giant pile of problems that Reddit was experiencing at that point, but they were very similar to the problems we'd experienced like 5 years before. And we already had like a playbook to use to deal with them. And we had a whole bunch of experience with doing the other things that are needed to build a company. And it felt like it still to this day feels like a magical second chance at an opportunity to like solve a bunch of problems that I had cared a lot about that I had already had some answers for.
I'm curious about, you mentioned that like the travel startup is sort of, in terms of like Reddit, the people are using it every single day. You guys hit product market fit right away, but the other travel startup just probably the opposite problem happens. Like, it's hard to make people stick. And curious, why do you think it's just people just really like to use Reddit right away? And then like, what's a different problem that you were facing in those two companies that are like drastically different?
Well, I mean, well, one of the we've had a whole bunch of like fake taglines for Reddit. The one that I always liked was "Come for the cat, stay for the community." It's all about, initially the attraction of Reddit was always the entertainment or the information, and in a way that is like, how should I put it? Like the community at Reddit has always had this kind of innate sort of snarky skepticism that's stuck around for the entire duration of the site. And it's kind of a cultural thing. And it means that like Reddit's the one place on the internet where the comments are actually better than the content in a lot of ways. When traditionally it's like, why would you read comments on the internet? Well, like the one place you can read them is actually on Reddit for the most part. Now, that said, we put a lot of effort and time into making sure that experience is smooth, right? Because if you think about it, you have the ultimate case of, we've always been outnumbered by our user base by about 1,000,000 to 1. And so whatever things we do has to scale up faster than our team can. And so we've always tried to optimize for community self-governance and like making sure that where we have the places that we can actually keep track of it. So like, okay, so one example, voting. Voting on Reddit has been a core competency since the very beginning. And it's actually a really important point to be able to make sure that the votes that we count are the ones that are the good ones. And good is a subjective term. And what I mean by good here is, we don't want to make it a place for cheating and like boosting content that shouldn't be in front of a bunch of users. And that starts off with being about spam, and it later becomes about like the whole bevy of misbehaving that people can do on the internet. And so the line I've always used in this one is like, we count every vote, but that doesn't mean every vote counts. And it's a game of making sure that we can identify when people are cheating or doing things that are ill-begotten. I think to contrast, and that goes along with just scaling. So traffic's always high. We always have to scale up to deal with our users, and that means scaling the product. It means scaling the experience. It means scaling the technology, and all of those have different pitfalls and learnings along the way. I'd say the contrast with Hipmunk was just, the funnel is just so sacred. Like, you have to make sure that like every step you add to the funnel, you're going to lose users. And like, if you're talking about optimizing for getting single digits of bookings in a unit of time, that better be as tight as possible. And you have to be able to identify all the places where you're losing people and why. And so we got very good at like, we actually built out a very rich data science pipeline from scratch at Hipmunk. And we had an awesome experimentation framework. And if anything, I've been spending a lot of time coming back to Reddit, just chasing that framework we had set up. And so, the learning there is kind of craftsmanship. It sounds kind of hokey, but like, you gotta have an experience that is actually pleasant and well thought out, and like also very well measured and maintained. And that's been something that's been a little harder to apply to Reddit oftentimes, because there's just so much happening on Reddit at any given time.
Yeah, I think you brought up a really good point. You mentioned about the community is self-governance. I feel like nowadays the new apps are all trying to build great communities, I feel like Reddit is more organic, and then like the current apps that are mostly trying to replicate what Reddit has, achieved back in time. And what do you think make Reddit that different, that make people want to self-governance?
I mean, self-governance was the cornerstone of how we ended up bootstrapping the site to its current size. So the origin story of that is, and what, what's unique about Reddit as a platform is that we started off with us, there originally was just a single page that was the front page of Reddit, where all the
Mhm.
content kind of accumulated, and then
Mhm.
realized early on that as the community gets as the community of Reddit users gets broader, the
Mhm.
topical areas that they want to engage with will kind of fan out, and then you don't want to end up a situation where you have like the average be the response that you see, because that's how you get like the lowest common denominator set of things. um, Separately, there was a certain amount of pressure to start to identify places to categorize content, because like politics is always something that's divisive, and even back in 2006 2007 was like the first thing. It's
Mhm.
like, why is there all this politics on my front page, was like a constant
Mhm.
complaint. And so what we did early on was we decided, like, okay, so let's just try to scale this up in the obvious way of, we'll make topical areas, call them subreddits, and just hand build a couple of them. And this was Steve's strategy, and it was brilliant in that he just we had a plan early on to, like, at some point we'll figure out a way to make these self-serve, but let's just start off with the basics of just like build a couple of our own.
Mhm.
Um, and that turned into a problem of also figuring out how to moderate communities, um,
Mhm.
where you start to need people who want to actually engage with the community and keep track of, like, manage spam, manage the community health. And
Mhm.
so when we actually we had a chance to kind of experiment with it early on with about 10 communities. Before we called them communities, they were just subreddits.
Mhm.
When we opened up to sort of the self-serve model and kind of opened it up, there was already some well-trodden kind of paths on, hey, look, we'll let you run your community. If it works, it works. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. And for probably about for the first roughly 10 years of subreddits,
Mhm.
the model was, yeah, create any community you want and good luck. See you later. And so it just kind of went off into this like organic growth model of, success or failure, here you go. And it wasn't until really recently, like last couple of years, where we started to look at successes and failures and try to help help communities to grow, or at
Mhm.
least try, having a giant pile of like anecdotes and insights into what helps communities grow, being able to actually help with that process.
Mhm.
But I will say that at the end of the day, the moderation approach is one where, hey, look, we want people to be engaged with the content that they are. Um, we want them to engage the content they're interested in,
Mhm.
either from the standpoint of being able to submit to communities that share common interests, or being able to moderate communities that share that kind of common interest.
Mhm.
Um, and the only thing that scales with humans is humans. So we can either do it in the heavy-handed way where we have to be the arbiters of taste, or we can
Mhm.
let communities figure it out on their own. And I think
Mhm.
self-governance is a pretty well demonstrated way to operate, and so we chose that one.
I have another question on like the competitor side. I know that you guys had
Mhm.
a competitor called Dig. Now I feel like it's kind of gone. I mean, when I think about like any sort of like online conversation happening, I just think about Reddit. I don't even know if Dig still exists. Curious, what happened? I heard that you guys were the underdog back then. Now you guys are like the winner. What's the difference between like Reddit and Dig that like made Reddit more successful now?
So yeah, this is around 2010 when Dig was our competitor, or before. We were always the underdog, but I think by about 2010 we discovered we'd actually just about kind of caught up. In fact,
Mhm.
what went wrong with Dig, and actually Dig was a very important lesson to me early on, which was, if you're gonna do something drastic, make sure to only do one thing drastic at a time. Dig had a very well publicized disaster in middle of 10, where they were doing simultaneously a technology rebuild, a business model tweak, and they
Mm.
also updated the way they did their algorithms at the same time. And they did it all with like a hard cutover. And so it's like it's a good case study in how to break trust with your community at the same time that your technology is brittle and not working because it's brand new, and just kind of do everything wrong at once. And I
Mhm.
apologize to any former Dig users and or Dig employees who are listening to this. I mean, we at that point, so at the time, it's like August of 10, we actually dropped by Dig headquarters, and we was like the entire engineering team of 4 dropped by Dig to kind of say hi, in part just to kind of see how things were going. They're using some technologies we were already using, And we just wanted to make sure there was anything we could do to help, because we were kind of afraid about the onslaught of users that would arrive on our front door if Dig were to go down. And so I remember that week was like a tough one. We had to scale up drastically and like kind of absorb the onslaught. You know, like I said, a lot of lessons learned, a lot of technology lessons learned, a lot of business model lessons learned. Since then, it's been actually fun to watch the entire social space kind of grow up, and to show that, the model of Reddit still works, and is actually really effective. So, I don't really know who our competitor is at this point. Kind of choose your adventure, but like, we're probably competing with everyone else for time at this point. It's pretty broad base.
I think Reddit has such a powerful community. I couldn't think of a direct competitor nowadays either. Like maybe I don't know. I literally
Yeah,
don't
I
know
mean,
what's
it's kind of
like
like
Quora. Maybe I don't know.
I don't maybe
It's very different. Yeah.
it's kind of like we're kind of like the progression of like forums. Like, what do forums turn into in the modern web and modern apps? And like, the model works, the technology still works, and as long as you have good moderation. I think another thing I should mention too about differences of us is that honestly, the culture of the platform is important. So there was an initial kind of culture that was baked in of like how to self-govern, and we kind of built in a set of rule, like a way for moderators to set their own rules and like enforce them. And that also helps to set up cultures. And so it's less so that we're like a giant moderated platform. It's more so that we're a bunch of communities that all have their own models of how to govern, and they can set us their own tone, and it just kind of works. I mean, the nice thing about that model is that, there are rules that are enforced on the platform by most communities that we could never enforce as a business. Like, most communities have a rule that effectively boils down to don't be a jerk, right? And it's not much more than I can call it if I see it, but there's a certain power in that, and you can have the community decide what jerk is depending on the tone of the community.
I feel like Reddit has always been keeping it real. Like whenever I search on anything else, I feel like it's all hacked by like the advertisers. Reddit is so like really organic, really most likely people are saying the truth. I feel that's how I feel at least.
Oh, for sure. And I think that I used to joke that if there wasn't like 1,000 people telling me I was doing a terrible job on the platform, then I wasn't doing enough. The community is definitely it's exciting to always hear exactly what we're doing wrong at all times.
I'm curious, how do you guys keep the community so strong even to today?
I think that, so where we put a lot of our work, and where we've put, especially for the last 4 or 5 years, is to figure out. Okay, so we've kind of bucketed under what we call authentic behavior. And this is a way to kind of absorb things like, okay, so it's starting like working up the hierarchy of needs for community. The first one you encounter is spam. So if you have a platform that's job is to generate attention and eyeballs, it's going to be gamed. And so it is impossible to do a perfect job on spam, but everyone who thinks that there's a lot of spam on Reddit should consider that we catch like 99.9% of it that's actually going out. And of course, that last little 0.1% is annoying, but it's like the tip of the iceberg. And that with that spam comes all of the like pile of, I won't even call them humans or bots or agents. They're just these things that are trying to game the system and work on it. So it's very adversarial. So that's kind of like one major piece. Going up from there is just providing a safe environment for users. And again, we will never do a perfect job, but we will always try to iterate and improve on what we did in the past. And that goes all the way from like, starting off with starting to get onto preventing user harassment where possible. Trying to identify places where, groups are being targeted on the platform. Whenever you have communities that self-identify, especially in at-risk groups, you end up with wars between communities and being able to maintain, who's attacking human at a given time. Last summer we rolled out our first ever hate speech policy, which was something that we had to learn to scale up and basically again improve the level of discourse. And so we just keep trying to keep the bar for discourse high, and we try to pay attention to user safety as a main component of how we operate, and we try to facilitate our users being able to see what they want, control what information they share, and honestly have a a fun but real experience, and it's a very tough line to be able to stay on top of.
Yeah,
Edgy but safe is difficult,
I do.
and we'll never hit it, but we'll always try.
I think this is called like innovation stack because I was the co-founder of Square was on the show and then he wrote a book called Innovation Stack. So essentially it was a lot of things you guys were doing right to make it like unbeatable, I guess
Mhm.
like uncopyable. So maybe that's why like you were doing all the controls or like not controls, but like helping people to having a safe community that can self governance.
Yeah, I think what's been hard to replicate from Reddit is really the culture, like the culture of the stack, the culture of the platform, and also just the cultures that are formed in the communities. Um, it's somewhat it. There's been some fantastic studies of like how rules on Reddit have turned into cultural norms,
Mhm.
and it is very like it's somewhat intangible. And I mean, beware of physicists who are meddling in metaphysics. But that's kind of I definitely feel about Reddit is like there's a whole bunch of like it's like watching experimental sociology like writ large and mostly functional.
I think it's just really amazing. It's like really hard for another platform to like even do anything remotely close to that, I guess. I'm curious. So at one point, Condé Nast bought you guys and you at the core team all went on to do their own startup or like their other projects. And then 5 years later, you guys came back. What's happening there and what have you guys learned?
Well, yeah, I think so with the leaving originally, it was we were acquired. We had a pretty clear kind of like somewhat standard like 3-year vesting cycle, and like
Mhm.
um we never thought of it at that point in our lives. It didn't seem like Reddit was a vocation. It felt like it was like a first thing, which is why
Mhm.
especially Steve went off and decided to like, well, make another startup and just do it again. And I had the same kind of attraction to like go over to Hitmonlee and do the same thing. And it was tough to leave, but it definitely felt like, hey, Reddit was in good shape. We'll kind of let it be and like go off and do other things.
Mhm.
Fast forward 5 years, and like middle of 15, early 16 was like a tough time for Reddit, where it had kind of scaled past its point where it was stable and there was a bunch of problems on the platform and a bunch of toxicity kind of like worked its way in. And um, that year was the year where I discovered that I thought I had kind of emotionally separated myself from Reddit and thought of it as like a kind of a done thing.
Mm.
I'd even like a couple of years after that, after leaving, like kind of gave away all my t-shirts. Like I had like one or two like of the original t-shirts. Stupid. I wish I had all my vintage t-shirts. Um, and that was the point where I discovered that I actually wasn't as separated from it as I thought. Or like,
Mhm.
it's almost like it's like finding your adult child is like going through a rough time. Maybe
Mhm.
was the best analogy. And like decided to go back and just there is a certain like reason why the return of the founders stories happen and turn into some successes. It's like you kind of get, well, first of all, you kind of know the problem space. You're coming into a new job with a bunch of experience,
Mhm.
and separately you do get a certain amount of like free pass because um the way I always thought about it coming back was that I've seen Reddit go through some terrible things in the past. I
Mhm.
personally have broken Reddit in terrible ways, and it's always come back. And so it's not like there's less of a fear about like taking this thing apart and putting it back together and hoping it still turns on when you've already done it a couple times. And that was like something that took a fair amount of had to kind of do it to see that it was actually possible to kind of like come in, make some changes, and things didn't break, or they broke but we fixed those too.
Mhm.
um, and kind of work from there to grow the company up into an actual like lovely business as it is today. Here I
Mhm.
am. At 2016 we had 75 employees, and now we're getting close to 1,000. And it's a lovely, lovely place to be.
As a CTO now, like what's your growth thought back then? Like, I mean, I feel like at any point you could have joined another really like hot Silicon Valley startup based on your track record with Reddit, right? And how, I mean, you still like stick around with your core team from the beginning. What was that like? And then what was the decision over the years?
I think that it would be hard to pry me away from Reddit at this point, just because the whole job has been about growth, right? There's
Mhm.
always like another challenge, and like the problems today are always different from the problems yesterday. And so, I have a ton of challenges, and I get a chance to like learn new things every day, which is fantastic.
Mhm.
I don't think if you'd asked me 10 years ago if this is where I would be, I would have been
Mhm.
way off. I think at that point, right? It's like, or even like 15 years ago, I would have thought I was gonna be an academic.
Mhm.
10 years ago, I would have thought I was gonna still be an IC, hacking away. And here I am as like, running an org of like a couple hundred people and not writing a lick of code day to day. It's a definitely, it was a very gradual shift over a very long time, but it's been
Mhm.
delightful, and I've enjoyed every minute of it. Plus
Yeah.
I have to say, like, the people are fantastic. Like that's been the real joy has been hey, I spent the last 5 years growing a really awesome team. I kind of want to be with them when they continue to succeed.
Mhm.
Watch
Mhm.
them grow.
You just talk about like the growth of Reddit. I think couple maybe like 2 years ago before the pandemic, 2 years, wait, maybe a year ago, I think when I actually took a visit to the Reddit's old office.
Oh,
And then
really?
I think at that point you guys were only, I guess, like between 95 to 200 people. And then now you guys are way bigger.
No, so last year we were at, how
Maybe
big were
not
we at Slowe
last
last
year.
year?
The
Um, a couple. So I think it depends on, yeah, it depends on when you did it. So like last year, start of the year, we were probably north of like 500 or 600 people,
I think
give or take.
yeah, maybe before the pandemic. Before the pandemic happened, maybe like the end of 2019, you guys were in an old office. I think you guys are in like a new office now.
Well, funny
I
story
could
about
be.
that one. So we are in a new office, and our start date for our move out date for our old office was March 13th, 2020.
Mhm.
Which, if you remember what you're doing in March, that was exactly the time when we went from everything's fine to
Mhm.
everybody go home.
Yeah.
And so it just so happened we had our new lease, or we had our new office plan starting like in like late May, March,
Mhm.
early April. And so this was my sitting at my current desk at home is week number 60 something of initially a 2 week work from home period that we planned for moving offices in San Francisco. So it went from
Mhm.
like it was like a week of um, hey, we're gonna, it's like, hey, remember everybody get your stuff ready to work from home for 2 weeks. And then later
Mhm.
it was like, maybe it'll be longer than 2 weeks. And then a couple days later it was, and maybe New York, Chicago, Santa Monica, and Dublin, you all should work from home too.
The opposite of going to work
Yeah, it's
at
like,
the office. Yeah,
yeah, yeah,
the
yep.
moving. So speaking of hiring, you guys hire really proactively, and like I know that sometimes I saw your LinkedIn posts and like you guys are hiring someone that's like really really technical. Anyway, so I guess like you guys are growing really fast and then you're hiring a lot of people. What do you look for in the people that you hire? And as a non-technical person, if I want to work with like technical talented people, how do I kind of recognize their talent? Like what are some benchmarks that people should, I guess, look for? And then how do we make ourselves more, what does technical people look for in non-technical co-founder or people to work with?
Yeah, so I think I could probably answer the first one. I'll cover some of the second. So if kind of what we look for, um, you know, it's honestly been a game of just continuously trying to raise our bar for the talent we hire.
Mhm.
And the nice thing about any kind of exercise of bar raising is like as you hire better people, they naturally attract better people, and
Mhm.
also your company gets better. It's like it's kind of magical. Now the hard part is always getting started there, and there really is some importance in like getting some good people in your initial founding team. Um, I think that the hard part about growing up a business is honestly the other side of it, which is that if you're constantly raising your bar, it means that you're going to start to grow past some of the people you hired early on. And
Mm.
that's either an opportunity or a crisis, depending on how things are arranged, right? Because the opportunity is, like to my point about, I feel like I'm growing every day, you know, I've got to keep growing because the whole business is moving around me. And so I can't stay still.
Mhm.
Um, and it turns into honestly some tough decisions and discussions about like, hey, is this like kind of the right place anymore
Mhm.
for certain people? And that's actually okay because at the end of the day, it is work. It's a job, right? It's not like
Mhm. Mhm.
it's not personal. And in fact, I often try to go into, especially for management discussions, I try to go into with a certain like, hey, my job as a manager is to help you grow in your career. And ultimately, if that's here, great. If it's not here, also great. I'll totally help you in whatever next thing you try to do. And that's just has to be part of the contract up front. In terms of like what to look for, I would say this is again something that's definitely changed over time for me. If you'd asked me like early on, like technical chops is really critical, being able to be really good at what you do. That's still very important. And like, I don't want to downplay the fact that like, yes, engineers' primary job is to generally write code and be good at it and to like be technical. It's also really great if you're not a jerk and you're able to actually like work with other people and like work on a team. And the cultural fit and knowing that, well, first of all, defining what you want in your culture is critical as you grow. Sometimes you have to define it by discovering things that don't work. Other times you discover it as you're kind of like finding things that do. It takes a long time to have cultural changes shift. Cultural shifts take a while. Turn that into a sentence. And so you have to be very deliberate and can't change it too often. But you get a chance to set the tone of how your people work. It also helps you define like what you're looking for in candidates when you know what your culture is. So I think for Reddit, we want people who are going to work hard. We also want people who are going to work well with others and like can collaborate. I mean, ultimately, Reddit is a community platform, and so you have to have a notion of like working with people. I think also, it started off as a don't be a jerk, and then we've defined it more in the positives over time. I think back to some of my roots. Like for engineers, I like critical thinkers. Like I don't necessarily care about getting the right answer. I care about showing me a path where you can find an answer is more important. Because honestly, like for a lot of technical interviews, like I don't want a gimmick. I don't want a riddle. Like you have to like, I actually like giving people real world problems and seeing what they do with it, because I don't probably have an answer. In fact, most of your day job, you're not going to solve a problem that has an easy answer. Like if it has an easy answer, you can Google it. That's what the internet's for.
Yeah.
I think in terms of like the answer to the second question about what to look for um, in a technical, like being a non-technical person who is looking for something technical, start off with, hey, if they seem really smart, but you can't understand what they're doing or what they're trying to achieve, it's probably not going to work. Like they can be super awesome and a great startup person, but they have to be able to talk to you, especially as a co-founder. And to some extent you can take some of it on trust later when they're working on things that are abstruse and they know what they're doing. But as an initial relationship, you have to have some sort of common value and common framework to talk.
Because sometimes like as a non-technical person, we got introduced by our technical friends, so and so is amazing, and how do we kind of evaluate their work besides our friends tell us they're good? What's the difference between a good founding engineer or like a co-founder that have an engineering background versus a person who will be great working as a software engineer at Google?
I think that honestly, for the sake of like starting a company, definitely dedication's a part of it in a way. It's like you're doing it for the glory and with a certain amount of hope. So maybe to flip that around, it doesn't hurt to be a little crazy as part of it. Like, you have to be a little bit off the beaten path, because you're going to have to be willing to kind of like, I mean, whenever I am, well, let me put it this way. As I've been growing up the company and like debating with people who are thinking about taking the cushy software job at the larger company, my usual argument with them, or like my statement that usually makes them decide is like, look, that job is going to be there in a year. In fact, the offer probably won't expire, because they're hiring 1,000 of that job. This job exists right now, and so it's no harm, no foul if you want to take the dedicated, clear path job, but maybe live a little while you can. And I think that usually resonates with people, or at least gives them a chance to make the choice of like, do I want the paycheck or do I want something that's a little bit more? But I do think that is actually a large chunk of it. Like we usually talk about internally about hiring missionaries over mercenaries. It gets a lot harder to do that as the company grows, because to some extent we start becoming a more stable business. It becomes a lot easier to just be like paycheck to paycheck. But I still want people with a certain amount of passion and dedication. So for the helping find a co-founder, I don't know. It's one of those things where it's like, I think founding a company is not much different from being a parent. Like you don't really know what you're going to do in those situations until you're in it.
Mhm.
And unlike being a parent, the operation is generally reversible. So if you decide you don't want to do it anymore, you can get a bill out, find somebody to take over for you. That's considered a bad form as a parent. As a
Mhm.
co-founder, it's often you see this come up with technical co-founders or on both sides where, at some point the business scales to the point where they decide that, hey, maybe me being the boss here or being the manager here is a bad idea. And that's a perfectly reasonable solution, is to say like, yeah, I don't want to be the manager of 100 people. Let's hire
Yeah.
somebody who's better at it than me.
I mean, that's like I love the honesty, and I feel like that's a I mean, it's a really great way to look at things. If you can do it, then do it. And then if you can always, do the other thing. In
Yeah, I have
terms
to
of
say, in fact, sorry, I think that the tricky part for me, honestly, of growing Reddit to this size is that I think as I've probably gotten across in this interview, I don't take myself hugely seriously. I actually give people a hard time who take themselves too seriously,
Mhm.
and I have to remind myself like, oh, I guess I am kind of a big deal. Like there's a lot that's like going
I
on at
mean,
Reddit
I
these
I
days.
definitely think you're a big deal. So
So it's like,
as a CTO of Reddit, I feel like the technology is changing really fast. There's always something new coming up. How do you keep yourself stay on top of the technology game, or how do you expand your own personal knowledge database?
well, I will mention that I do read a lot of Reddit, but I also tend to read. I think at this point, let's see, for I still also read a heck of a lot of Hacker News. I think I
Mhm,
still use Hacker News this day as like a good place to
mhm,
kind of keep tapped on what's going on
mhm,
in tech at large. Um, uh, Generally, I think to be honest, one of the hard parts about COVID has been, and it took me a while to notice this, was that I actually spent a lot of time on my commute reading. So I used to commute by public transit, and so I spent a lot of time in the morning reading, and it's been a lot harder to kind of keep that up. But I will say that good old-fashioned books at this point has been a major source of it, especially as I get more into management, like figuring out books that have, there's management books are a dime a dozen, but finding good ones um, is an art, and like
mhm,
definitely been a couple of them that have resonated well with me. I think one that comes to mind is like what is it? The Hard Thing About Hard Things
mhm.
was one that I read about 2 years ago when going through some tough reorg stuff, and it was a great reminder of like, no matter how bad a day I was having, there's much worse days you could be having. So yeah, no, I mean, like, honestly, it's finding time to read and just to do the stuff that feels like you're not working but actually are. Oh,
Yeah,
self-work, self-help is actually critical.
self-help.
Practice self-care.
That's so interesting. I thought you were gonna read like the, TechCrunch every day, or like some sort of technology journal.
No, it's more like it's just kind of like just kind of keep up to date. Just read low key. Yeah.
What do you think would be the differentiator between you and, you know, or and some other people who, you're pretty successful today. Reddit is like a definitely like I don't even know if it's a unicorn. It's never a startup anymore because it's like a really big tech company now. I'm curious, like, what's the difference between you and like someone who, also joined a top startup who may not achieve your level of success? What's the difference between someone like yourself to them? And I know it sounds like a super douchey, but like I feel like I definitely trying to understand like what make a great person great.
No, okay, so I mean I'll be totally honest on this one. And this is I'm not trying to continue down this like low key thing. It's like I really don't think people appreciate how important luck is in the situation. Like um I have I've worked extremely hard. I have done a lot in my career so far.
Mhm.
I've also been super lucky. Like being in the right place at the right time doesn't hurt. Like, hey, at the end of the day, like I got into startups because I happened to run into an old friend after a talk who just pitched me on a startup idea.
Mhm.
I became the first employee at Reddit because I happened to have a failed startup in YC and had 2 free rooms in my apartment. Those little things are important, and like they don't feel like much at the time, but they end up being the points that change your life. Like it's like, I put it in the same class of things as like, meeting your spouse, right?
Mhm.
like that, maybe the skies opened and angels sang, but sometimes it's just like at the time didn't seem like anything other than like, oh cool, new relationship, and you find out that you have something magical with somebody. Um,
Mhm.
uh, that was another thing I did in 2006, by the way, was met my wife that year. I must have been indestructible. I didn't sleep much.
Oh, nice.
Anyway,
Congrats.
no, it's funny. I think that but the flip side of this, so the things that are under control are, yeah, like work on things you like as well. I think that passion is important, and passion usually correlates to something you actually like to work on. And so if you hate it, it's gonna be a lot hard. It's not impossible to work on something you hate and have it be successful and like be
Mhm.
a major thing, but it's definitely not the standard way of things.
What do you wish people knew about your job that is like kind of people normally don't know?
Well, okay, so one of my running jokes has been that the T in CTO stands for therapy. I spend a lot of time talking to people. I think that there's it's like anything else. Like there's a lot of day to day and a lot of coordination that happens that ends up being like just a bunch of like a lot of one-on-ones, a lot of discussions, a lot of stuff that feels like it's not might be a little bit to the side of the direction of where you'd expect it to be. But it's all about relationships to some extent, like, keeping track of your team, keeping track of your people, making sure that things are on track. Um, uh, that's probably most of it. It's like it is less architecture and more team building, but it's critical for the business.
I can definitely imagine the back-to-back meetings every single day, and there's a little fire on for you. The first question is, what's your favorite book?
Oh boy. So let me think about that one. I think, well, I gave one that actually has been pretty high on the list, which is The Hard Thing About Hard Things. That one was
Mhm.
actually very important. Another one, just a random book that really resonated with me. Actually, Shogun. It's a story of a 16th century Dutch, I think, merchant who's stranded in Imperial Japan. And the lesson I learned from that book that really hit me was, um, the main character is this character by the name of Toranaga, and the his entire strategy of how to succeed is to delay until the decision is inevitable. So it's like, and that is not to say that delay all the things, but like not everything is always urgent. Is the learning I got from
Mm.
that one.
Yeah, I love that. Actually, 2 episodes ago, the CEO of Skillshare said the same thing. His dad told him to like don't respond to the email like right away or something. So I mean, I like the message was kind of like resonating for these episodes. And curious, what's so who made the biggest impact in your career?
I mean, I'd be lying if I didn't say Steve Huffman. I think that
Mhm.
the two of us have been working together now for 16 years, and it's great to have found somebody that uh, you know implicit trust, and we have honest conversations, and um, it's been really great to be able to build this a set of wonderful companies with them.
I'm sure there's basically three companies like Reddit one,
Reddit one,
Debunk, and Reddit now. So,
yeah, exactly.
so who would you invite to your dinner party?
I would really like to at some point. This is a lazy answer, but I have to say it. It's like Elon Musk. I must be a fun guy to have at your dinner party. So I think he's also at. I think he also he just wins the nerd trifecta at all times, right? He's got like he builds cool cars. He has his own fleet of rockets. And he makes flamethrowers. I mean, like, it's like,
What else do you need?
what
as
else you
a
need?
nerd?
It's like, he has a company called the Boring Company that makes holes in the ground. It's like, how? Just, yeah, no, I think it'd be pretty high. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, what are you guys going to talk about in the dinner party?
I think we would probably end up having a discussion about cryptocurrency, which seems to be pretty hot on the list right now.
Mhm.
And
Dogecoin.
I would probably, yeah, Dogecoin, definitely. I would probably just end up, once I got over the initial fangirl screaming that I would do, I would probably end up trying to figure out how I could get on one of those, eventually retire on Mars, I think is going to be the long-term plan. or
Wow.
maybe asteroid mining. That's always been like if I was going to get into a random, I feel like asteroid mining would be the future direction of like some sort of space endeavor.
Where can we find you outside of work?
Well, COVID time is weird, so probably at my house is the same answer for both of them. But it's fine. I am the father of two. I've got two small kids, 10 and 7. And so generally helping around their school, doing stuff with them for sure. That's a big one.
What's your favorite Reddit forum? What is like your favorite thing to read on Reddit? Like favorite topics?
Oh boy. Okay, so I think I would say favorite community variously has been, I've always been a fan of Changing My View. Or I think more recently political discussion. Like there's two communities that are about like kind of having like open-minded discussions on the internet is just it's almost like it's not a lost art. It was never an art. And so to see that it can actually happen on Reddit is fantastic. Also generally like having kids, there's a couple of good kid themed communities that are on the like humorous side. There's one called Hold My Juice Box, which is generally kids getting into weird situations and not actually hurting themselves, but definitely something embarrassing. It's really pretty funny.
I'm gonna check them out. That's so cool. Thank you so much, Chris, for coming on the show today.
My pleasure.